Actually, while we're waiting, are there? Let's get a sort of sense of the people in the room. Anyone here who has played a board game in the last year? Oh, now that's it. Perfect. All right, you're in the right group now. Okay, so, I mean, of those people who played a board game in the last year, have you played the Days of Wonder board games? Not iPhone games at this point. And those of you who played the board games, yeah, okay. So we see quite a large group of you who clearly are fans like myself. So I'm going to hand over to Yann with no further ado. Much more interesting than me speaking.
Thank you, Oscar. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? No? Oh, here it comes. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the world of board games. We're going to speak about something a little bit different. You know, you have heard a lot since yesterday about virtual games, digital games, mobile games, all that kind of things. So maybe it's time for a little break and speak about physical games. And after that, I'll tell you a little bit more about what we do on iOS. So, you know, for some of you who know what we do at Days of Wonder, we are a classic board game publisher. So the question is, why did we go digital from the get-go, right from when we started the company 10 years ago? So I cover that and speak and then compare the cardboard business and the digital business and what it takes about game development in each case. Obviously, going digital creates some interesting design challenges for us, and I'll talk about business results in the end. So why do we want to go digital? Is it only so that mom can relax a little bit on her computer? Well, not only that. To really explain how and why we're doing this digital stuff, I thought it was important to give you a quick recap of what the board game business is. And well, today the number one selling game in the world, number one selling board game in the world is still Monopoly, which was created in 1936. So it's a very, very stable industry. To give you an idea, the really largest company of toys and games in the world, Hasbro, which was created in 1923, and they sell Monopoly and Clue and Scrabble and all the other games. They still exist today, and the chairman of the board is the grandson of one of the founders of Hasbro. So, you know, it's really a big family business, very stable. When you think of it, when you look at the design of the Monopoly, it hasn't changed. It has less changed than another American icon, which is the Campbell soup, for example, which is done quite differently. It's not the case for the board games. Monopoly still really looks the same. But, you know, one other thing you need to know is it's publishing, it's classic publishing, and publishing business is actually a terrible business. It's very bad margins. You know, it's a little bit like the books industry. It's very similar to the book publishing business. Very bad margins, but if you are lucky enough to sign a Harry Potter, then it becomes a terrific business. I mean, it's like literally printing money. The more you print, the more you're going to make money. You know that because the market is going to absorb everything that you print. So that's a very quick overview about the board games. So what about us? We were coming from we were Silicon Valley veterans coming from the high-tech industry in the 90s and so on. And in 2002, we thought, okay, well, we're kind of tired of this. Let's try to have some fun. We were board games fans. So let's try to build a company that is going to last for some time and make some money, hopefully. And we were very lucky because in 2004, the Ticket to Ride game was awarded the Spiel des Jahres award in Germany. To give you an idea, it's like winning the Oscar award for an independent director. As I said, the board game publishing business is a very small market. A success is 10,000 copies only. So you sell a board game like 40 or 50 euros, and you have a hit if you sell 10,000 copies. In Germany, when you get the award, the converted Spiel des Jahres award, you're going to sell 300,000 copies in just 12 months. So that completely changes the level. It completely changes the game, and that gave us a huge boost, which changed our lives, and after that, it changed our business. And since then, in the past 8 years, we have sold 3 million board games. And again, these are physical board games. And we entered the iOS market with the release of the iPad, and I'll explain why. And we were lucky to be in the top 10 grossing apps on the board games section. So one thing we realized very early when we created the company, everybody loves board games. You take your friends to a game night and you show them a board game, you have a great time, and at the end of the evening they're going to tell you, oh, I love this board game, when can I buy it, and so on. Okay? But on the other hand, if you offer a board game to a friend, without telling him anything, just, here is a nice present, you can be sure that the next year, when you visit him, you're going to see the board game unopened on the shelves in his home. So why is that? I'm going to show you. The problem is the in-game interactive tutorial. That's the in-game interactive tutorial. Okay, the rules. You have to read them. Everybody hates that. Okay? So we realized that and said, what can we do about this? And that's why, because of the high-tech DNA that we had, at the very beginning of the history of the company, we said, okay, we've got to do something on the web. We've got to put our games on the web and allow people to play the games online so that they would learn the rules and they would be able to play with their friends and so on. Okay, so the first thing that we did was to put a sticker on the back of the rules with the code here that allows you to sign up on the website. The hope was obviously to create some kind of virtual circle. So let's compare a little bit the cardboards and the pixel worlds. Interesting. Well, there are plus and minuses in both cases. The cardboard, so what we do, it's very quick and inexpensive to develop a board game. Really. In less than 3 months, less than 10K of efforts, provided that you have the game design from the game designer properly made and tested, it's less than 3 months of work. And as I said, if you have a hit, you're going to build something that's going to last for decades. So that's a big plus. Now the minuses, it's really a pain. It's lots of friction. I mean, you have to build the damn thing. Okay, you have really to produce the box, which means, in that case, producing the plastic trains in China, shipping them by boat containers to Europe, assemble and print and assemble the game in Germany. After that, ship back the products to the US, distribute that into the channel through distributors, or put the products on trucks in Europe, on trains in the US, and so on. So it's really a full-time job, and it's not very funny. The distribution is very complicated. It's very fragmented. It's slow. That's traditional retail business. And on top of that, as I said, the margins are pretty bad. the best publishers, they do a 50 to 55% gross margin ratio when they are really good and when they get really good volumes. So that's a picture of the manufacturing plant in Germany. The big cube on the right side is the storage area where they store the games in a controlled environment. They control the humidity and temperature so that, it's made of paper and carton, so it's better not bent with the heat and so on. Okay, the digital world now. That you know a little bit. You are more familiar with that. So you get great margins once the game is developed. It's easy to distribute. It's download, or even better, if you have a web game, it's just a few seconds of downloading the Flash app, and that's it. It's sexy for the press and media. When you talk to the press about the board games, they go, "Oh, they still make these?" You really have the impression to be a dinosaur. The minuses about the pixels and the digital, well, it has a much shorter life cycle. Most of the time, the curves that you see on the right here is basically what it's going to look like. You're going to ship a new game, and in a few weeks or few months, it's going to go very high and then drop off, and people move to the next thing. The other big problem with digital games is that it's expensive if you fail. And it's not only the cost of developing the game that's expensive, it's also the time that you waste not developing another game that would have been successful. So that's always a time to market issue, and that's also a cost that you need to consider. So when we look at all this, the first thing that we decided was important was it's not really about the operating system. It's more about the customer ownership and especially the platform who has the credit card of the customer. The payment friction is a big issue. So the first thing we decided was to look at platforms where the payment friction was the least. Then the iPad came out, and the iPad was a really great news for us. It was the first invisible device. What I mean by that is, for the first time, we could have a device where we could implement a virtual board game, a digital board game with the two players sitting face-to-face around the device, and play and completely forget that they were using an iPad. So we released the first of all digital games on iOS on the iPad. We were very lucky because we were pushed by Apple at the very beginning of the release of the iPad as, we are creating some kind of new category. And after that, we went to the iPhone and iPod Touch, and I'll speak about that in a minute. So there are game design challenges in doing that. Okay, the first problem is board games are very different. First, they are turn-based most of the time. We have some board games where people play at the same time, but basically most of the time board games are turn-based. You often have hidden information, like you have cards in your hands, or if you play Scrabble, you have letters in your hand, and so on. When you think about board games and where the fun is coming from, basically you're asking your players to implement the gameplay themselves in their heads and reproduce it in their hands and do the interaction between them. That's really what you're asking people to do when they play a board game around the table. That's where a big part of the pleasure comes from. So we thought, okay, that's also something that we need to consider when doing the digital version. How can we produce that? And so we thought, well, let's not make anything different. Let's try to be as close as possible from the original board game, to reproduce really the gameplay, the pieces and so on. But it's not easy. Let me show you. Well, the first problem is you have the board itself, which is pretty large. Okay? And after that, you have cards, and you have plastic trains, like this, and wooden stuff. And you want to put all that in just an iPad, like this. And after that, your boss comes to you and you say, oh, it's great, the iPad version works great, so what about doing it on an iPhone? And you go, you've got to be kidding. So obviously, you understand that it's not going to be very straightforward, to say the least. So it's a lot of UI tricks, especially on the iPhone, animations, feedback to the users, messages, automatic zoom in, all that kind of things. Another thing that we learned is, and we were not expecting, at the beginning when we released the first iPad game, we were doing the head-to-head version, solo mode, and online, real-time online, because we are already doing real-time online on the web. And we got lots of feedback from the users. They asked for more and more and more different game modes. So we did the side-by-side so that people could play sitting on the sofa next to each other. We did the pass and play so they could move the device around from one player to another. We did the local play so that people having different devices could play together locally using Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. We didn't do the party play yet, but I mentioned it because Scrabble does that. It's, you have the iPad in front of you on the table, and then everybody around has an iPhone, and use the iPhone as a rack, basically, to play. So that's an expensive way to play, but that exists. It's pretty cool. And on the iPhone, we made some differences. For example, on the iPhone, we didn't implement the real-time online play. We went from the asynchronous play. And it's important to mention that because on the iPhone you can be interrupted at any time. You know, if there is a phone call or something like that, you really don't want to break the gameplay of your player. So asynchronous was the solution we chose. Technically, the issues that we faced and the way we went about them was to stick to the ship early, ship often. We thought it was important to collect the users' feedback since we were new in on this platform. So that's why, as I explained, we ended up developing a lot of different modes. The effect on the online server was pretty tough. Just in 24 hours, you double your traffic on the server. So be ready for that. Another technical issue we have is supporting multiple platforms at the same time. Since we have one server that is going to support all the clients, and for us, it's important that all the people playing with different devices, whenever it's the iPad, or the Mac, or the PC, whatever, it's important that all these players would play together on the same server. Okay, so when you play online, you don't know if the guy in front of you is using what kind of device, and you don't care. That's great. So of course that creates lots of interesting issues about server protocol and updates and that kind of things. On the iPhone, the 20 megabytes limit is an issue for us because we have lots of very nice graphics and a lot of languages to support and all that. So you know, technically it's a lot of retakes and fine-tuning and lots of game modes, so a lot of tests and so on. So it's a lot of work. What about the business results? Okay. Well, obviously, we were lucky to be pushed by Apple at the very beginning of the iPad launch. So being first really helped a lot. But being large, and that's really one of the ideas I would like to push, is the also, but it's very obvious, was also very helpful for us. To give you an idea, when we released the iPad version of Ticket to Ride, by just emailing our community of board game players, we saw twice as much as when Apple put us as the game of the week a few weeks later. So by just, using our own online community, we were able, and we did that again and again. We systematically did better than when Apple was pushing us. So that shows, and I will talk about it again, that shows that it's really important to have this community of players you talk to, you create, you develop, and so on. Because in the end, these are the people who are going to be supporting you and spreading the word. Another thing we found out is that the segmentation pays off. We were hesitating, should we do a universal app, or should we do an application for the iPad and then a specific application for the iPhone with an adapted gameplay? And as I said, we chose the second solution. And that really paid off because it helped us, it allowed us to put different prices on the iPad version and on the iPhone version, and they help each other. Okay? And that's really the virtual circle thing. When we release an iOS version, the board game sales, they automatically go up by a big factor. Okay? When you release the iPhone version, the iPad version, sales are multiplied by 3, 4, or 5. So at the very beginning of the presentation, I had this slide where we were saying, okay, the grand theory is the more people play, the more people play. Well, it's true. Okay. The truth is, there is no competition, there is no cannibalization between what you do online and what you do offline. It's quite the opposite, in fact. They help each other. So the Casual Connect people asked me to conclude on a few tips about what you should do if you want to develop a digital version of a board game. So obviously, as I said, the larger install base, the better. So you need to, if you are considering developing a board game on a mobile device or any type of digital device, take a very hard look about the existing community. Is it well organized? Are there relays online, forums? How the publisher handle that, and so on. Because if you don't own both, and that's our experience, if you don't own both the digital and the physical part of the business, you're going to leave some money on the table. So it's really important that you work your partnership with the owner of the IP, because you should know that by doing the digital version, you're going to help the physical version, and vice versa. And of course, that's probably the most important thing of everything. What matters most is the gameplay. In the case of a board game, we are forced to have good gameplay because there is absolutely nothing in the box, as I showed you, that's going to help us implementing the gameplay. So you have a good start from that, and the question is, how are you able to translate this gameplay on the digital support successfully by polishing the user interface and implementing all the game modes that I described, and so on. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much. Okay, so do we have any questions? Right down there. Thank you.
You are a publisher of board games. Who did then develop that digital game?
Yes, and well, people often ask us, okay, are you now a board game publisher or digital game publisher? And our answer is, we are just a game publisher. We, as I said, since the very beginning of the history of the company, we said, okay, we're doing the board game classic publishing business thing, but at the same time, we're going to push the digital part at the same time, because that's what is going to help us selling the board game publisher.
But who did develop the game itself? Do you
We
have a
do
programmer
it-
in-house now?
We do it internally.
Okay,
That's the team I am in charge of. So we're located in Los Altos in Silicon Valley, and the R&D development is happening in Paris, in France, which explains my accent.
Thanks.
Great, thanks. Any more questions? We've got a question over here. But we've got several, but cool.
Hi, Yann.
Hi, Dave.
So, you know, you have kind of a case study, the adaptation of Ticket to Ride. I know that wasn't your first digital product, even for iOS, right? You had Small World out there.
For iOS, we started with Small World.
So I'm just curious, how, you know, based on what you said, I would expect that the board game sales for Ticket to Ride were at least an order of magnitude larger than the Small World sales. How have sales in the digital realm sort of tracked your sales in the board game realm? Are they kind of roughly the same ratio? Are they closer?
It's the same
are they
ratio,
further apart?
yes. Basically, when we came out with Small World on the iPad, the sale of the board game, and it was like, you know, in the following 2 weeks, the sale of the board game just increased by 40%. So, yeah, we were happy.
Cool, thank you. We had another question here.
There's one here.
And there was one over there as well.
And another here.
Hi, this might be a bit of a fringe question, but in terms of production values for actual board games, a lot of the classical board games have very low production values, simple cards, simple graphics, simple wooden blocks dyed in primary colors. A lot of the American game companies now, like Fantasy Flight Games, go for much higher production values, sculpted plastic, well-rendered 2D art, etc. Do you have any comment on how in your opinion, that affects sales performance for the board games? Adding production values to them.
Basically, your question is how does the graphic quality of the initial board game will impact the sale of the digital board game?
Yes.
Is that your question? It's difficult for me to answer that because all the board games that we do are very rich graphically in the first place. So I don't have any point of reference I could tell you about. Sorry.
Cool. There's another question here.
There was a Japan over there.
I was just wondering if there were any issues when you were adapting the physical version to the digital version in terms of any rules you had to change or drop or things you had to add.
We absolutely don't want to change any of the rules of the game. It's really important for us because, as I said, the digital version is going to teach the rules of the game. So there are some games that we will never move to the digital space simply because they require, for example, too much interaction between the players, or some of our other board games you play simultaneously. So these ones are more difficult, would be much more difficult to do. So there are some board games in our product line that will never move to the digital space because of that. So it's not always possible.
So does that then affect what games you make next physically? When you guys going to look at it?
Yes and no. When a game designer comes to us to present a concept for a new board game, we always have in the back of our mind, okay, will it be possible to port that board game into the digital space? We always have this in the back of our minds. But if the board game is great, and if we like us, we're going to publish it for sure. Okay. But we publish very few board games, like 1 or 0 every year. So, and we work a lot on them.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to follow up on that question a little bit further, because to me it's an interesting one, because you could see that this mode that you're going from board game to digital, creating a kind of bright new future for board game designers to come into the online world. But the counter argument might be we start seeing less innovation happening in the board game space because the market opportunity of producing simpler games that can be translated becomes too appealing. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. You know, in the board game market has gone through a renewal from the past 10 years with the arrival of completely new game designers, a new generation of game designers, Anyway, everybody knows the Settlers of Catan, for example, games like that, or Carcassonne. So I wouldn't say that there is a lack of innovation in the board game space. Quite the contrary. I would say that there are lots of new ways to play. I mean, for example, we have a cooperation game when everybody plays together against the game. So there is some kind of artificial intelligence system built in the board game, and you play against the game. So you have all kinds of new mechanisms that came up and still come up, which are really interesting. So yes, there is big innovation in the board game space. It's just that people don't know about it.
A level of innovation that's coming back. So, some of the things that we saw Avalon Hill try to do, 10, 20 years ago as board games becoming much easier to manage in an iPad type environment, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Possibly. Any more questions?
Another one.
You're being greedy now, though.
Wow. And a gentleman over there.
Oh,
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Without getting into too much detail, but technically, on the technical side, for iOS, do you do native Objective-C?
We do native development, yes.
Okay.
So,
Do you have any plans to go start with a game on digital and take it physical?
That happened. In a couple of instances, we started by the digital version. One of the map of Ticket to Ride, the map from Switzerland, appeared on the digital space first. And since it was successful, we moved it as a board game and sold it as a box. So that can happen.
great. Any more? Are we all done? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Yann. It's been fantastic having you.